This is my post-fight video for David Price versus Christian Hamer. Do you know what? This fight wasn't actually nice to see. It wasn't nice to be ringside for. The only thing I can compare it to is when I was ringside for Enzo Maccarinelli's last fight, where he was horrifically knocked out by Dimitri Kucha. And I kind of felt the same watching David Price today. Obviously, as you guys will know by now, David Price lost the fight by stoppage, and I just kind of felt like we saw a man's career wiped out in front of our eyes, and a man who was an Olympian, a man who was regarded as the hottest prospect in British boxing at a time, and a man who many considered to be a surefire future heavyweight world champion. But anyway, it was a strange fight to watch. David Price, for me, was winning the vast majority of these rounds. Hamer was competitive, but essentially David Price was winning the rounds by boxing from range. He was actually putting punches together almost well at times. He was throwing combinations to the body. He was tucking in a nice uppercut. He was trying to get his big right hand going off his jab. And he dropped Christian Hamer heavily. Very, very heavily. But the problem for me with David Price in this fight was twofold. Threefold, actually. Number one, he had no jab whatsoever, which has been a recurring problem throughout his career. And that is ridiculous. If you're a 6'8" Olympian heavyweight, it's almost inconceivable not to have a jab. But David Price has no jab, which meant that he couldn't keep Hamer off him at all. That was problem number one. Problem number two was that when Hamer was able to get the fight up close and get onto David Price's chest and push him back, David Price literally had no idea what to do. He was so uncomfortable, uninstinctive, robotic when Christian Hamer was up close. You saw him literally against the ropes, and the only phrase I can use is you saw him with his back to the ropes squirming. There was nothing. He was trying to do this ridiculous getting low thing, and you see some fighters try and get low and bob and weave, and it's very effective, but David Price seemed to bend over it several times and just have nothing left to offer at that point. Thirdly was stamina. Tonight, David Price's chin didn't actually let him down. The stoppage was reminiscent of the stoppage in the second fight against Tony Thompson. David Price was not knocked off his feet and knocked unconscious by his opponent here. He was simply bludgeoned by his opponent to a point where he had nothing left. In a fight that David Price was actually winning. In a fight where David Price had heavily knocked his opponent down. In a fight where David Price had the size advantage, the power advantage, probably even the technique advantage. By bringing the pace, by bringing the pressure, and by making it uncomfortable for David Price. Christian Hamer wore him down, and Christian Hamer sucked the energy out of David Price to a point where he had nothing left to offer. The referee was absolutely right to stop the fight. For a few seconds afterwards, there was a bit of panic. People were rushing into the ring. I saw Nisei Sauerland run into the ring. A bit of a worry as to the state of David Price. I saw him walk out in the end. He looked okay. I presume he was just horribly fatigued and a bit hurt, and he needed a moment or two to collect himself and to recover. But it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty, and I've got to be honest. David Price is, he's a nice fellow. We all know that, and it was quite uncomfortable seeing the sort of panic at ringside initially after the stoppage. Even though Price never actually lost his footing. Unfortunately, this is the end of David Price's career at any sort of level. Christian Hamer is probably the weakest fighter, the most beatable fighter in the top 20. But he has obviously seen footage of David Price. He obviously knows the blueprint to beating David Price. And despite Christian Hamer's limitations, despite Christian Hamer's lack of power, lack of speed, lack of athleticism, lack of size. By following that blueprint, he was able to make Price very uncomfortable. He was able to take Price out of his game plan, and he was able to force a stoppage against the bigger man. And I'm afraid, having sat ringside there, could you say that David Price would have a chance of escaping an exact same result if it was Derek Chisora, if it was Dillian White? Any of those guys, realistically, you have to pick over David Price. Price can have a career as an opponent. He can come back, knock out 3 or 4 journeymen, and get a fee for an opponent against one of the Olympian heavyweights. Maybe Joe Joyce will want to fight a big name in 2 years' time, or something like that. Price could have a career if he wants to step down sort of English level and fight the Ian Lewisons, the Dave Allens, the Dominic Akinlades, the Nathan Gormans. Potentially those are the sort of fights that he can be competitive in. But I've got to be honest, with the strength of the heavyweight division at present, can I see Price really winning the British title? Can I see Price winning the European title? Unfortunately not. I actually think he's regressed. I watched Price's fight with Audley Harrison the other day, and that was a very short fight, as you guys know. But in that, he was very aggressive. He was very confident. There was a confidence and an aggression to his work. He was able to step in and execute and finish the job. Price for me, from the first bell, looked tentative, nervous, stiff, anxious. And when the gas tank started to empty, it emptied rapidly, and there was nothing left, literally, before you know it. And Christian Hamer, did what he needed to do, and credit to Christian Hamer, credit to him. He implemented the game plan very, very well. He showed great heart to get up from that knockdown. That was a very, very heavy knockdown. Christian Hamer was best part of 19 stone himself. He showed a far better gas tank than the bigger man, David Price, by being able to continue putting punches together and continue wearing down his opponent when David Price's gas tank was clearly starting to empty. All in all, a sad sight to see. People can make jokes about David Price, people can be mean about David Price, but David Price has shown a lot of heart to continue his career in the face of adversity. David Price is a very, very nice guy. But unfortunately, whilst we always knew David Price was probably never going to be a world champion, today we found out the true extent of his limitations. And whilst Price always has a puncher's chance in any fight, realistically, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see Price again after that. Hopefully he's made enough money in his career to set himself up. I'm not sure if he has or not. I'm not sure if he's been in the big size fights to put himself in that position. But he doesn't need to be getting back in the ring now. I think the extent of his abilities and the extent of his limitations are clear to all. And it's a real shame. It's a real shame. Price, for me, at times, reminded me of a young Vladimir Klitschko. Not as talented, not as athletic, but some similarities there. Tall, powerful, rangy, and under Emmanuel Stewart, Vladimir Klitschko was able to perfect his style. He was able to throw everything behind the jab. He was able to use the jab to set up his power punches. He was able to hold and close down opponents on the inside. Price literally had no ability to do that against Christian Hamer. Price had no jab to keep Hamer off him. It really was uncomfortable seeing Price, back against the ropes, bending over backwards because he couldn't escape, and then leaning and, he just didn't know what to do. He did not know what to do. It's unfortunate. You see people in an amateur boxing ring who are more capable in those situations when their back's to a rope and they need to find something defensively. I don't know if Price has done any interviews. I don't know what the reaction's been here, but it was uncomfortable to watch. I actually found it a bit unpleasant and a bit sad to watch in the flesh. I hope Price is all right. I hope he recovers, and you know, there's a lot left for him out there, whether that's punditry, whether that's some sort of coaching gig, or whether it's another career. You know, he's a young man, obviously, with a big future ahead of him. But yeah, this boxing game isn't for David Price, in my opinion. And the future in the sport for David Price is either dropping sort of English level, or, you know, becoming an opponent who gets knocked out by prospects who are, you know, en route to becoming top 20 fighters. And that's not what, you know, David Price's career has been focused on from turning pro as an amateur Olympian. Let me know your thoughts, people. How much credit do you give Christian Hamer? You know, is Christian Hamer actually a decent fighter? Would you like to see David Price again? Is this the end? Should he retire? Leave your comments in the section below. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, do subscribe so you can check out my other stuff. As always, many thanks indeed for checking out the channel and for watching, guys.